Chapter 24. What is an MRE? Usagi asked, while she looked down at the remnants of the brown bag she'd just been eating out of. She, of course, did not pronounce it as an acronym. Rather, she pronounced it MRE. The state of their lives being what they were, I should confess I was impressed she retained any knowledge of letters at all. But then, as there were still bits of signage left here and there, I suppose it might have been sufficient to at least keep the memory of literacy alive. I wasn't about to rebuke or even correct her. If anything, I felt a great welling of pity in my soul for her, and what a pitiable existence it must have been. And I wanted to see her warmed and well-fed. Bao's bonding with her was no more shocking than my own to my humans. And there were lessons to be learned here that could be learned no other way. Perhaps I should be ashamed that at the core of myself my zeal for knowledge, and yes, my ambition to rise, was undiminished or perhaps even inflamed by this unexpected opportunity. But I am Dlamison. I am a scholar in training. My duty to preserve and advance learning is never far from my mind, and so I cannot feel that shame. And also I could console myself by saying, the knowledge you spread may help prevent this from ever being lived by anyone ever again. Like photographers who took pictures of suffering before rendering aid, so that a call for help might reach millions beyond themselves alone. If it was an imperfect reason, well, I was and am an imperfect being. Excuse or no, there it is, and may posterity forgive me my imperfections in the same spirit that they benefit from my work. It stands for meals regretted enough, Byron said, and Bosun looked at him cockeyed. Really? He asked. No. It's a joke, Byron explained while he dipped his spoon into a container of applesauce that was probably 10 years old. Regretting food. Strange. Usagi has never regretted food. Even sick making food is better than hunger. Her belly rumbled again. Just eat slow like I told you last time. You haven't eaten much and you'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast, Bao promised. I was beginning to regret that Fauve was minding the drone more with every passing second. I don't really know what I was expecting. Some sickness, bad but bearable. But starvation, stupidly, had not occurred to me. Usagi wasn't that different from Fauve in age. It was like an apocalyptic mirror. The girl's dirty face and sunken blue eyes were somewhat glassy, her ribs visible when she pressed too close to her shirt. I had to wonder if she was being given less food because she was an orphan. I am ashamed to say I hoped so, not because I wanted her to starve, of course. But seeing one like this was bad enough. Could I cope with seeing a dozen, 100 like her? There are times, I admit, I have hated myself, and even though that thought was not meant to be cruel to her, merely wishing for there to be less suffering rather than more, I loathed myself for the thought, however brief it was before I could crush it utterly and resolve to make up for it, even if I never gave it voice. Usagi, what happened to the supplies I gave you all when I left? Bao asked. The manager gave them to the new mothers. There was not much, so they got it all. They cannot feed their infants if their bodies are not fed, and the hunt was not good. Usagi had to go out, find food for myself on the way to meet you while the long steps moved to new grounds. We asked the power makers, but they are sick now too. It is worse than we told to you. Usagi is sorry, but even for you Starwalkers, you may come and see we cannot be helped. Can Usagi ask one small thing even though the lie was said? Bao nodded. The blue-eyed rabbity girl wrung her hands together in her lap. Her ash-stained ears drooped, and I actually expected her to ask for another meal as her belly rumbled again. But instead she said, In the Stonecrest People Place, there is a field of flowers. It is said that the dead of the old times sleep there. If we do not survive, bury Usagi there, deep so the wolves do not eat her. Sleeping beneath flowers forever sounds nice. It is a better end than the sickness gives, and better than what will happen when we are too weak to fend off the wolves or the big cats or other creatures. Usagi does not want that. Usagi wants flowers for her last blanket. Is this too much to ask when Usagi has nothing to give? She won't have to keep that promise, Rebecca said with iron determination. That won't be a problem. It all reminded me really of what Boswin mentioned to me before, when we were buying equipment for volleyball. If war broke out between Earth and Lamius, at this stage I had no doubt that my world could win. We knew the stars, had a large armada and many developed worlds, as well as an economic system expressly meant to prepare us to fight again. Earth was strong. They were rapidly building colonies, but they had yet to build the massive defensive networks of starbases and ports. They had only a few great stellar construction sites that could build the ships that could traverse the stars. As a species went, they were like no other in the galaxy with their natural ability toward violence, except perhaps for ourselves. Peace or war seemed settled now, with Bonnie Red being the ambassador to end all ambassadors in one single moment. The praise she gave to humans, and her larger-than-life presence and demeanor, her performance at sports, and her frank beauty in the eyes of humans as much as Dlamacens, both regal and youthful, both strong and open. The reactionary elements of Earth, who might have gained strength from my recklessness, were almost quashed by the fact that this one so clearly adored them and looked exactly like everything humans adored. But as I looked at this desperate, starving human child, the reminder of what Bosun said came back to me. If war were to break out, this was the fate that would befall humanity before they could rise again. And if they grew strong enough to prevent it, this is what they would visit on those who attacked them. The horrors of war are sweet candy to those who never experience them. They are rich adventures to those who have full bellies and warm beds, but they forget what else it is. Orphan children who do not know why they are orphans. Hungry bellies eating rotted food because it is the only food they have, and even sickness is better than starvation. It is cold nights and burned homes, confusion, chaos, and pointless deaths for those who neither had nor wanted any part in it. And over 200 years later, the results of it lived and suffered on. Anything we could do to avoid risking a new war was worth it. And when I realized I was thinking that, I realized something else too, that our ancestors on Dlamius began to make a great deal more sense. It was likely exactly what they were thinking when they imposed a reshaping of our society into something that could utterly crush any potential threats to our worlds. To prevent this, how far would I have gone? Would anyone have gone? I think our way of life was my answer, and even though I was determined that it would change, I cursed my ancestors just a little bit less, and pitied them a great deal more. Chapter 25. The life of a Dlamisan is measured not in seconds, hours, days, or even years. Our lives span centuries, if we are not killed by circumstances. The oldest known of our kind, at least to me, lived 626 years, by our reckoning, though what that is on the human calendar I have never bothered to calculate. His age was such that he could still remember the grandiose speeches of those whose fathers lived through the age of chaos, who were themselves old Dlamacens by then. But human lives are old at a mere 80 years. A bad decade or even century for a Dlamacen can be overcome, but for a human, it is their whole lives. Hearing a girl no older than my fauve speak with passive acceptance of her own possible death in the near future, and wanting only to have a blanket of flowers and a deep hole for herself so that she would not be eaten by wild beasts. I could think of no words of comfort for the little rabbit. What could I, who even at my worst knew only a full belly and a warm home, say? She did raise her head, but not her ears. She was quiet for a few minutes, and I very much doubted she believed we could do what Rebecca said. And after all, Rebecca was a biologist, not a doctor. The best she could really do was provide basic care with knowledge of the body, and seeing her, even that was suspect. How much did they have in common with normal humans anymore? The best chance for Rebecca to help lay in her ability to collect and analyze genetic samples to determine what we were dealing with. What was this, a sickness? What was the state of the little tribes in this errant wasteland? I just had no idea, and Bao lacked the experience to properly explain it, while Usagi lacked the words. Some things, though, words were not needed for. Bosun handed over one of the Dlamacen variations on the human MRE, which, if you are not familiar, stands for meals ready to eat. Both of our species had similar nutritional requirements, and so far no allergies had been found that would prove lethal to either of us. Another mystery that would one day need answering. For now, she tore into our people's package, unlike the human one, which still used a kind of plastic, albeit easily broken down. Ours was packaged with an edible substance that chiefly felt like plastic. It would not taste good. Truth be told, it did not taste like anything. But every bit of our packaging was edible, albeit far, far more bland. The human meal was rich with flavor and quite variable, chili with spices and salty crackers, a cookie made of oats and raisins, and a piece of bread made out of mealed corn. Ours was more efficient than theirs, but if forced to choose, I would take the human one first. Usagi, however, didn't seem to mind. Her pale blue eyes were filled with tears that wouldn't fall as she ate with gusto, as if she were at a feast of the highest order. I thought back to our meal at the restaurant in Louisville. So much food only hours away. Hours. Yet this one was half-starved, and it sounded like she was no worse off than the rest of them. How do you all even survive out here? I hadn't meant to ask it, and Bao glared at me, but it was a question that, even if I hadn't meant to ask it out loud, did need to be asked. Usagi's cheeks were stuffed and her ears perked up just a little, wiggling in front of the drone. Her mouth moved up and down and around in the way a human's typically did when they were chewing something tough, which was another feature of Dlamacen food. We are a meat-eating species, and as such we don't consider tough meat to be too much of a problem. She hastened to finish chewing and then swallowed a lump that must have been hard to get down, and began to explain. And I must emphasize here, or rather, re-emphasize a point I have brought up before, that humans are born storytellers. Usagi sat cross-legged in front of us, and rested her thin arms on her legs, and let her little pack fall free along with her coat. She then began to speak in an almost hypnotic voice of the sort only gained among humans by long practice. In the long ago before great want for life, there was great want for happiness, and always the world sought more, and the gods looked on man and said, "Look at our creation. His happiness will surpass our own if we leave him be. It is not right that man should surpass the gods who made him, so we will steal the happiness of man, and punish him for usurping the place of heaven." She held her arms out as if to grasp us, her voice rising as if to imitate angry gods. "And they smashed us, burned us, destroyed our homes and lives, and cast us out of the heaven we made, and down into hell. Fire swept the land and burned the sky, and all mankind might have died in the long ago, and left only the eternal silence in the world as the gods intended. But man was a canny creature, and some foresaw the wrath of the gods. Those few in places like in the Chicago area had feared the theft of their happiness from the gods before. In a place called the 50s, where a dangerous monster named the Red scared all who came too near to it. This threat had once come and gone, so man knew what to do. She smiled in spite of herself, putting on a conspiratorial expression and letting one ear flop down in front of one eye. Fauve zoomed in on her right then. I'm sure of it. I caught the rotation of the lens reflected in the pale green light. These wise ones dug holes in the earth like this one, and lined them with the black rock, whose shadows even the gods could not see through, and whose invisible poison could not penetrate. And they appeared in many places, along with far talkers and tools now lost to us or mostly broken, when the great shout of the gods— She shouted as best she could, making a bwee-ah noise like a great alarm sounding— "Came to us on earth, the wise ones and their chosen. They took their families and servants to the great holes and hid away as fast as they could. My great ancestors from the long ago, the long steppes, followed a mighty man named Burlington, a manager, who made it his mission in life to provide warmth in cold times, guided them to the hole in the ground that was prepared here. But her hands began to drop as moroseness filled her voice. The gods moved faster than any man, and the great fire touched the sky. Those of us who were slowed by our attempt to save our animals were cursed or blessed as we took on some few of their strengths." Her eyes welled up again. "Many died deep in the earth, some never came out of their holes. Others, like the Longsteps, emerged changed. We say that some sympathetic god changed us, so that we would not be recognized by the gods who tried to slay us all. That with our ears," she touched her long ears fondly, "or tails or long beards or hooves, the gods would not come against us again. It was a heavy price, as the gods sometimes see, and slay our young before they are 8 days old, but others live. Sometimes the gods see, but the mother gives her life to the gods as the price of sparing her young. But we lived. The heroes and heroines who saved us in our hiding emerged one by one, from months to years after the great fires died, and we separated ourselves from one another. In this way, the gods could not strike us all dead at once again." She had a little smirk on her face that could be called proud, even if her sunken eyes were still full of painful tears, and her belly rumbled despite the size of the meal she'd just eaten. "The gods could not get us all, if we were not altogether to be got. The mighty manager of a farm who was said to have fed the billions, his yellow sign still stands in old places in Chicago. His rival, Mighty Hardy, and their neighbors, the gamblers who played at dominoes and were said to be able to race food to the hungry before an hour's candle could burn halfway down. It was an age of legends, and legends saved us all, for a while." Her head hung. "But it is said that talent skips a generation. And in the after times beyond the fire, those who emerged began to plunder Chicago area, taking the places where food was held and hoarding it. They would not share, mean-spirited times, and the children began to kill one another. Those who were not blessed, or cursed, by our love of our beasts, began to die off. A second wave reduced our numbers, until only we of the blended survived, perhaps because, as the good gods hoped, we would not be seen as man. A few of the normal man fled out of the waste, and what did not died anyway. Those who remained, we had enough now that we could talk, and Chicago area became only Chicago, and Rhea, the land outside it, was divided. The city itself stands as free plunder and meeting, and the power makers sometimes bring things to bargain. But less, always less in the years before my birth. And now, it is almost nothing. A sickness comes, our gathering is weak, the moss we were able to eat is dying, the ground will grow little, and that makes us to be sick. The beasts are more fearsome too, and our hunts, always somebody seems to die. And within Chicago, we are running out of places to forage. Then we met Bao, and now you are here. Usagi bowed her head. And I am sorry you came only to watch us die. She looked toward the shaft leading up. I will go check for the wolves or other danger. Please make ready to rest. I believe we will be here this night and meet some of my folk tomorrow, but I should still check anyway. She didn't wait for an answer from us, but she didn't need to. None of us could bring ourselves to move a muscle, nor say a word. Chapter 26. What did you see in the time you spent here, insofar as dangerous creatures? Byron asked. And what do we know about these other groups? It was the first word anyone said while we were waiting for Usagi to return, and Fauve was quietly piloting her drone around the room. She'd barely said a word since we arrived. But when Byron spoke up, the drone zipped back over to catch sight of us. Wolves almost the size of you. Lions even bigger. Giant snakes in the water. I guess you could say this is a place of megafauna. The city had a lot too. I saw cat creatures that spread their legs out and sailed from tree to tree on the air, or from floor to floor in the tall buildings, what is left of their ski scrapers. I wouldn't want to be near there when those come crashing down. Plants are growing, but they don't seem to be all that edible. I can take some samples and figure out why, but what really interests me aside from the megafauna is this mention of a moss that they eat, and this sickness. I can't help but think that those must be connected. Shouldn't you have gone with her, someone? Fauve asked over the audio of the drone. If it were close enough to be dangerous, we'd know about it already. Bosun replied, There's nothing to worry about for now. I guess, but, Mom, what are you going to do? That's sad. We've got to do something, Fauve exclaimed, and her mother took a deep breath to buy time for an answer. I'll take samples with my kit and route the data back to my office for analysis. Once we know what we're dealing with, we'll know just what to do. I'm going to do my best. That's all anyone can do, Fauve. Maybe you should let your father take over the camera work. Mom, if they can bear to live it, I can bear to see it. I'll be 15 in a few weeks. I'm not a little kid anymore. Fauve protested, and I could tell by the steel in her voice, so like her mother's own steady resolve. Is it any wonder that someone like her could pioneer a whole new field one day? Not really, it's no wonder at all, but it is amazing. Her mother could tell that this was not a battle she was going to win, and she wasn't around to fight it. Anything she did was likely to make things worse, so she instead said, Fine, but you have to promise to close your eyes if I say so. Close your eyes, and let me guide the drone by hand if I think something is too much for you. Deal? She asked. Fauve's voice came in a moment later. She knew a sticking point for a negotiation when she heard it. Neither wanted an escalation, and so Fauve said over the audio static a moment later, All right, Mom, it's a deal. She may have been reluctant, but she agreed. It is interesting to notice that these kinds of negotiations between parent and child are not uniform. Some parents I knew would only give commands which the children would then be expected to obey. However, others, such as Fauve's parents, seldom needed to give orders blindly. They had her trust, and so if it wasn't important to her, Fauve tended to listen. However, where it mattered, as this did, Fauve pushed back and they would come to an accord. Some have criticized them over the years for this. The parenting styles of humans vary considerably. Fauve's parents believed that they created an independent child who was capable of speaking for herself and wouldn't just blindly obey orders. Expecting her to think for herself was an important facet of parenting for them, and given the result, I cannot argue that it was not effective. I myself didn't like that Fauve was seeing this. It is natural, I think, to want to protect those we care for. And the more I thought of that, the more the history of my own world and people began to make sense. Usagi returned a few minutes later, her ears up. She was all business and said, Wolves are far, but they linger. They follow the scent we leave, but they are hungry things and impatient. If we wait till the new sun, then we will be free to walk the rest of the way. What is this thing about the power makers exactly? I asked. Their name had me curious, and Usagi sat herself down on a nearby ancient mattress and let her ears flop down beside her head. They have matcha ines that make the strength of their bodies into little boxes. These they put into other matcha ines, and then their managers go away to pray, and come back with things to trade. Sometimes blankets, sometimes even food or seeds. But the seeds are a taunt of the gods. They will not grow, so we eat them at least, when we can get them. Usagi explained. It wasn't hard for us to figure out the fine points. But for clarification, Rebecca asked, "Their tribe, where did they come from?" "They say they were spoken into being, that the universe created them and taught them the secret knowings of the gods," Usagi explained, and that clinched it. We were not all well acquainted with each other as a group, of course. Bonnie Red was still a new companion, but all of us were now well enough learned in silent talking to one degree or another that we could almost perfectly perceive each other's shared realization. The power makers had been attendees at a university, likely in the engineering department, students or teachers, and had managed to keep power going through generators, treadmills, if the strength of their bodies was any clue, and had managed to hook up at least one terminal somewhere to the wider world. At best, guess they were powering it and had managed, somehow, somewhere to get packages shipped in, probably close to the dead zone, giving them a tenuous link and a small amount of resupply paid for by credits mined from sweat. If they really were running on treadmills or some other machine to generate energy credits to trade for goods, then the men and women who got it started must have been geniuses of the highest order, and good teachers to pass on the how to their heirs, but not of great character, to have hoarded their knowledge to use as leverage over the other tribes, and even their own. Goodness knew what anyone made of it, but it seemed to have endowed the leadership with some degree of authority, and the people with a scant lifeline to vital supplies. But still more questions lingered. Why have none of you tried to leave? If you know there is life beyond Chicago, why not leave it? I had to ask. It just seems so nonsensical to stay where they suffered. Those who looks like me will not feed me. Why would Usagi expect better, when Usagi is part beast? The gods tore us apart, and we remember the stories of the old world. Where differences are despised, if we travel outside, we are sure to be killed. Stories exist of other holds like ours after the fall. They tried to talk to normal humans and were slaughtered like beasts for their trouble. Usagi does not want to die. I will trust Bao to know a human who can be trusted. But how can we trust the ones who slew all those who tried to talk in the years after the fire? Here, where none of them lived, we can be safe, we can hide. And if the gods visit their wrath on man again, we will at least be spared it. I looked at Rebecca. She shook her head. She didn't know the answer to my unspoken question. Other holds, other places in the deep. It sounded mythic, but if there were a crisis and people were preparing for the worst, it wouldn't have been impossible by any stretch of the imagination, and it wouldn't be hard to imagine a group of humans slaughtering the residents for their supplies either, and then being just forgotten in the chaos after the fact. And now, this group learned to avoid all contact, and regular humans had forgotten they ever existed. The radiation levels required special preparation or tools to securely visit, and there was no reason to go anyway. Eventually, it likely would have happened, but those with exploratory minds were going to space, not other places on Earth. So if nothing went wrong, it might be hundreds of years before anyone ever visited places like this one again. If they did and nothing changed, all they'd likely find are vicious creatures and curious skeletons. None of us wanted for that to happen.